welcome to another edition of Empathy at the Table. I'm your host, Tony Anagor. I'm a negotiation specialist, and I look at negotiation through the lens of emotional intelligence. How do we manage our emotions during our negotiations? What part do they actually play in the outcomes of our negotiations? And I talk to experts all over the world in various different verticals, from sales, procurement, contract negotiations, hostage negotiations, academics. And we really try to unpack the power of emotional intelligence in negotiation. And today I'm speaking to a very special guest. His name is Totti Karpela. He's actually my first guest from Finland, 20 years experience in the National Police Squad, where he specialized in threat management. Now, Totti is no stranger to threats and conflict. He's a 6'5", 250-pound human specimen. And when he shows up, typically things have gone wrong. He worked in the K9 unit, so he shares many stories of how he found himself in conflict situations, and he had to de-escalate these situations. But what was really impressive about Totti's body of work is that he's done some deep research into what was the process before he was called to a situation. So what are some of the triggers and how could they be avoided so that situations do not escalate? And he takes his work into companies where he sees the signs of potential escalation, potential conflict, and shows companies how to manage this conflict. We have a really great conversation, and Totti's an absolutely fantastic guy. Looking forward to this conversation. So join us on Empathy at the Table. Hello and welcome to another edition of Empathy at the Table. I'm very pleased to introduce you to our next guest, Totti Karpela from Finland, all the way from Finland. Now, Totti, you're the first guest I've ever had from Finland, so this is a real first for me. I'm really excited to get into a great conversation with you. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, Tony, thank you. And thank you for giving me the honor of being the first Finn.
Yes, indeed.
Podcast.
Indeed. So let's kick off. I've got loads of questions here that I want to ask you, and hopefully we'll get through them all. If not, I might have to call you back for a second interview, because I found your profile extremely interesting. So for our listeners who maybe haven't heard of you, could you just share a little bit about your trajectory into the world of negotiation and who?
Yes, I'd love to. So my background comes from the police. I spent 20 years with the National Police of Finland. 15 years out of my 20-year career in the police, I was also working at our police university college, teaching conflict resolution, verbal de-escalation, and negotiation skills. And 10 years of my regular duties, I was one member in the National SWAT team negotiator unit, as a negotiator, but also as instructor for the new incoming negotiators. After that, I've lived around the world. I have two companies. Both are focusing on conflict resolution, one here in Finland and one in South China, in Hong Kong. And I've worked in 70 some countries, teaching communication skills to a broad variety of people. And that's
Wow.
about it.
Well, let's unpack this, because I know listeners, you can't see this on the screen. Totti is a 6'5", 250-pound, and used to work in the K9 unit. So these, I think, am I right in saying the K9 unit? These are the nutters, right? The crazy people that show up when everyone's running away from violence, running away from a threat. You guys show up and you go straight into that. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, we typically use the term the stupid guys, because we're the first ones going in, right, no matter what needs to be done. But that is the correct. Yes, I spent a number of years with K9s in an emergency response team.
I mean, what was that like, to know that every day you wake up in the morning and you don't really know what kind of threat you're going to face, but you need to be ready for it?
Well, I think that's with every police officer, well, mainly in the uniform patrol. You never know what's going to happen. But when you're young and you don't always acknowledge the risks, then I think that's the best place to be at, because you're the first person in, you get to all the exciting calls. It was a blast. It truly was. And as you get older, you start to acknowledge the risks, and there's more at stake, having a family later on and all that. But it was certainly a blast. And you always drive with the same partner. So you actually spend more time with your partner than with your spouse.
Hmm.
So it's very intimate, very close relationship.
Yeah, you build a bond with your partner, right? As you're
Absolutely.
facing danger. I mean, I think that the idea of you showing up when there is danger puts you in a position where you almost need to go from zero to being fully alert almost immediately.
Yeah, and that's very typical for your uniformed patrol. I mean, it could be 11 hours of just boredom. Nothing
Hmm.
takes place, nothing happens, and you pull over a car, and the next thing you know, you're wrestling, or you're pulling your gun out, or you're chasing a person. So it is very stressful for both mentally and physically.
And one of the things that really interested me about your work, Totti, was you said to me in one of our conversations that when things got violent, that typically meant for you that things had gone wrong. You interpreted that. Was that something that you felt from the beginning when you were like, in the heydays pumped up with adrenaline, or did this come as a reflection over a period of time?
No, I've done martial arts since I was 10 years old. And like you said, I'm a big guy. And my partner in the canine unit was slightly bigger, and we had a very good working dog. So the physical challenge was never a challenge. And as a young police officer, that's what you expect. You think, seeing all these movies and TV series, you think that's what police work is all about. But in one of our previous discussions, as I mentioned, I started to analyze what takes place before you have to resort to physical
Hmm.
force. So I did quite extensive study on the information that the dispatcher gave us, the conversations we had as we were driving up, and what happened before you had to use physical force. And most of these calls and the results in my studies was there was some sort of a mistake or problem or lack of knowledge related to your communication skills.
Hmm.
And like I said, the physical challenge was not a challenge. For me, it was always a bigger challenge of what do we need to do so that we don't have to use the physical force.
Yeah, so for you, of course, the easy thing is to just wade in there and use your physical strength. That's the easy
Yeah.
thing, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so when you were, you said you kept a diary, right, of all these calls and so on and so forth. And did you monitor like the calls that went to, for example, the switchboard, how that was communicated, and then how that was communicated to the team that had to go to what the crime scene? Was that in that level of detail? Is that what you were monitoring?
Well, I started my career in late 1980s, and at that time, the calls coming in were not recorded. So I didn't have the luxury of going through what did the dispatcher ask, and I didn't have the time to interview the dispatcher regarding his or her bias or lack of skills to ask the right questions. So my diary and my study was only focusing on from the moment that we got the information and
Hmm.
what happened based on that.
Like when you researched this, did you notice there were maybe some trigger words, for example, in the way in which, for example, if I say to you right now we're facing, yeah, a high conflict situation and we need you to show up ready and armed, ready for action, versus, hey, Totti, look, we're facing a situation here where there is some heavy tension here and it does require a level of emotional intelligence for us to be able to deal with this. You know, the same situation, but different descriptions. Did you do some work into that?
That's a really great observation, Tony, because what I did notice, and this is a really difficult challenge or problem to tackle, because obviously when you're going into a call that has very high probability of violence, then you talk with your partner, and other units might jump in as well, saying the person of concern, the suspect or subject, depends on the call, is really difficult. Or your partner or somebody else might say that, oh, I know this guy, you always end up wrestling with him, which already creates you a mind map or a plan how this call is going to end up.
Right.
But that information is also very important from safety and security perspective. So if you know that you're meeting a person that has previously been violent towards the police or any type of authorities, then that's the information you have to discuss. But how do you do it so that it doesn't push you kind of seeking that information that confirms the preliminary analysis to be correct?
And so with this knowledge, were you the only one doing this, by the way, or was this something that was mandated by your company to start investigating this communication chain?
No, it was I think I was the only one. I've never heard anyone else do it. I've never come across anyone. I mean, nowadays in 2025, we got some really fantastic studies coming from the new recruits getting into the police work, and they're wonderful material, which I frequently benchmark and copy and use it. But in the late 80s, early 90s, nobody was doing it.
Yeah. And so let's go now to, you took all this information and you were used to basically facing aggressive situations on a daily basis. Explain to me, how do you get to the position where you can manage that, for want of a better phrase, pure aggression, right? You need that aggression in order to be able to survive. You know, it's like a boxer who's paid to go out there and box, and then suddenly they have to retire. What happens with that dragon that you have inside you? How do you channel that? What do you put it away? What's that process like?
Well, spending 20 years in the police, and also I'm still in the reserves for the military police. Being in Finland, we have the conscript service, and all the men are still in the service until they reach a certain age. It's a slow process, because if I compare my attitude and my preparedness when I was a 20-year-old young police officer, or when I was a 40-some years old sergeant, those are two very different people. Also, your role is very different. You're not the first person going in. You are sending somebody in, and you also become wary. And as your knowledge increases, also your hormonal changes impact how you respond to these situations. So I didn't feel any major change when I left the police. I think I had done enough, and I kind of enjoyed the fact that there's no more of these high stakes conflicts. But I mean, you get into conflicts if you want to
Yeah.
on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And like you've said it, and so many of your podcast guests have said that every day you have negotiations. So it depends. I mean, I use the skills that I learned in the police and that I was teaching in the police. I use those skills nowadays as a customer, because you just have to switch sides, and still it is about influencing the other person who might not be willing to do the things that you want from a customer perspective.
And so now you work in corporate companies, and I think I read that in 1 year you had over 800 different assignments, 300 different clients in a year, and you're in the threat management business.
Mm.
When the kind of threats that you look at now are, I think I read stalking, malpractice, bullying, that kind of thing. So you've moved from the stuff that happens in the street to the stuff that happens in the office, but you're now on the threat management side. Can you expand a little bit about that, about what the landscape looks like in the corporate world and how you fit in there?
Sure. Well, first of all, the numbers that you mentioned, that's the whole company. So it's
Yeah.
not just me, myself, and I.
I was going to say, unless there's 10 of you.
Yeah. So if you look at violent behavior, and if we do a very black and white kind of distinction or separation, we have spontaneous, impulsive, or defensive aggression and violence, which is the typical fights that you see in the morning hours after the bars close, and Also, unfortunately, very typical domestic violence cases where the perpetrator did not wake up 9 o'clock in the morning saying, I'm going to have a fight at 11 o'clock in the evening. So that's spontaneous. And that's where the de-escalation plays a bigger role. And then you have targeted, premeditated, or a term that I like to use, predatory violence. And when you look at sexual harassment or bullying or stalking or doxing or brigading or anything related to this, that's a very different sort of perpetrator, very different types of situations. And unfortunately, in these situations, your communication skills do not always play a similar role. I mean, they do to a certain extent, but I mean, the things that I love doing are the interventions. And very often our clients don't want themselves to deal with an ex-employee. It's either the head of HR or the former line manager where the conflict originally originated and they don't want to see this person again. So that's where I come in. And I'm very transparent. Who am I? What's my background? And who pays for me to be there? So we sit down and in these situations, the negotiator background comes in. Like I said, I'm very transparent. I'm always telling that anything and everything you say will be recorded. This is not confidential, but I'm simply here to listen your side of the story to make sure that we'll find a solution that hopefully works for everyone. Now, obviously, in my line of work, you meet people who are very difficult or impossible to reason with. So at least they get their 50 minutes of glory talking to somebody who doesn't have a bias towards them.
Yeah. Two interesting things. I like this idea you mentioned about spontaneous violence and someone who wakes up at 9 o'clock in the morning, not expecting to be in a fight at 11 p.m. So I would suspect that those are the people that you could appeal to with logic, literally by saying, knowing that they don't really want to be in that position. They don't really want to be in a position where they have to use violence or have violence used against them. And so maybe you can use maybe a deal of logic mixed with emotion in a situation like that.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, absolutely. You're spot on. Because in the beginning, I think it's not about logic. It is about emotions. It's about empathy.
Yeah.
When I was in the police, I don't recall a single call where I would have been able to calm down a person with logic. Well, sir, according to penal code so and so, nobody's interested when they're really angry.
Yeah.
But when you approach them and say, it sounds to me you're very unhappy about the situation, or I can only imagine how I would feel if I would be in your shoes. That's how you build the connection. And when you get that emotional contact and you de-escalate that emotional side, then eventually you build rapport and you introduce logical steps as what to do next.
Yeah. So, I mean, I speak to a lot of practitioners around the world, and I hear this a lot when they talk about people who are in academia, people who've studied negotiation, and they understand all the frameworks, but not always put them into practice. And then on the other end, you have the people who are in hostage negotiation and all that whole arena, and they try to move into business negotiation. And I often hear people say that the two are totally different. You can't apply the same skills as you apply in hostage negotiation, where if you get it wrong, somebody dies, versus in the business negotiation where, well, the stakes are high, but they're not life and death scenarios. How would you respond to that as a statement?
I disagree, to put it in a very blunt form, on several levels. First of all, even in business negotiations, it can be life or death situation. A company goes into bankruptcy or you end up being fired, and that's creating a domino effect. And in the end, I mean, you don't obviously see it right at the negotiation table, but later on you might have a person who takes their own life because one thing leads to another. What the first time that you and I had a discussion, I really liked the idea where you mentioned about in a negotiation, there's always emotional reaction in the background. So even though the stakes right now, right here, are not the same, in the end, I think the similarity, what is in every negotiation, is that eventually, whether you acknowledge it or not, it's about emotional response. I mean, you can try to justify your decision with logic as much as you want, but in the end, we're primates, we're mammals, and our behavior is dictated by avoiding uncomfortable situations, pain, mental or physical, and trying to feel good and gain emotional profits.
Yeah.
So I'd say there are similarities. And
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a tough negotiator in your mind and it's only business and logic, then I don't think you're very liked, and that's gonna drag the case longer and
Yeah.
be more hurtful for you.
Yeah. Yeah. What's a tough negotiator to you when you hear that term? Because I hear it all the time. In fact, I even posted something on it recently because I wanted to understand what people mean when they say, "Oh, she's a tough negotiator," or "He's a really tough negotiator." What when you hear that, what does that mean to you?
A tough negotiator.
Yeah.
Do you mean it as a positive trait or negative?
Exactly correct. That's the question. If I was to say to you, you were going into negotiation, and I framed it and said, "Well, the person you're negotiating with is a tough negotiator," what would constitute tough for you?
Okay, I have two examples that come to my mind. In the police work, a tough or a difficult negotiator, if you're thinking of the people that you were negotiating with, would be a person that would not give any indicator as to what they're thinking.
Okay.
So, like catatonic individual,
Mm.
because it was much easier to negotiate with someone who was shouting and threatening you, and just everything about them was about aggression. And then you would negotiate with somebody who would pick up the phone but not say anything. So you didn't know how they're responding to what you're saying.
Yeah.
A tough negotiator in the business world would be something similar, but they would be people that would not meet you, not halfway, but not even 10%, and just stick to their. Because I mean, who wants to negotiate with a person like that?
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
that would be again a difficult one to reach. Because in the police, what you very often wanted to do is you would want to find at least something where you can agree with them, and then have that person agree with you as well. Minor bits and pieces. Friend of mine, Dr. Helena Allman, who's done wonderful studies on negotiations. She used this example. I'm not sure if that's her example, if she picked it up. I mean, she's gone through Harvard and all these FBI, New Scotland Yard negotiator schools and stuff. She said that in negotiations, it's not a black and white decision. It's like a canvas, and you put these holes with a needle. And once you've done enough of those small holes, eventually it's going to start to leak. Eventually, you'll get through that canvas that in the beginning was impossible to penetrate. So even in business negotiations, I would say that's a tough partner to negotiate, who doesn't give you anything in return.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think tough is a bad thing. I think, I don't know, I'd like to be known as a tough, fair negotiator, right? So for me, I'm not afraid to advocate for what I really believe to be true, what I want. There's some things there are total non-negotiables, and there's other things I'm prepared to be flexible. I think rather than be called a tough negotiator, I like to be known as being tough on negotiating the things that are non-negotiable, but really flexible on other areas. And I think that's a good reputation to have. I have a question for you, Totti. I'm straying off the subject a bit, but you brought it up. One of my friends, John Zimmer, he'll be happy I'm asking you this question. He tells me this story that Finns are very comfortable sitting in silence. And I just want to ask you that because in relation to negotiation, silence is a very powerful tool to use. Number one, is this true? And if it is true, do you use this in any of your negotiations?
Okay, yeah, it is 100% absolutely true. As I mentioned, in the police, you always drive with the same partner. I kid you not. that we would do 12-hour shifts, and I would meet with the canine handler, with my partner Seppo, and we would put the car equipped with all the necessary stuff that we would have, and we could literally drive for 12 hours without a single word being spoken.
And you were perfectly comfortable.
See, in Finland we say we respect the silence. If you have nothing to say, why say it?
Wow. That's excellent. So
yeah, John is spot on, correct.
John is spot on.
That one.
I'll let him know. I'll be happy about that.
But in negotiations, the more typical situation where I have used, because I mean, even though I worked most of my career in uniform patrol, you have to do, when you're being promoted, you have to do investigations and all that. I would constantly use silence in interrogation. And even though you would interrogate mostly Finns, when you are the suspect, you feel uncomfortable because you don't know what the police knows and all that. So you would simply pose a question and then just wait. And people get very uncomfortable with the silence. Definitely.
I mean, I often find with silence that there's a point beyond which it becomes hostile. There's a comfortable silence where you are letting the other person think, come up with an answer, or when they ask you a question, you give it enough space to really consider your answer, so that when you open your mouth and talk, it's a well-articulated thought. But then there's a line beyond which you go where it can almost feel hostile.
Yeah. Again, I fully agree with you, but I wouldn't call it silence. I would call it pausing. So definitely, and that's definitely something. I typically use two examples. One is when somebody is speaking to you, and then it's your turn to answer. Then, like you said, instead of replying immediately, I'm going to give it 10, 15, 20 seconds, simply to create an image or an atmosphere that I'm really thinking about what you just told me, and I want to be sincere and honest with my answer. But also, when you're using that pausing, you are giving it a new rhythm, because when people are angry, it's pop, 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 and then it's your turn to speak, and you wait for 10 seconds. And then when you start to speak, you slow down. So you're giving it a new rhythm for the conversation. The other way of pausing, that where I use it, and already in the negotiations when I was in the police, is when you have something really, really important to say, give it a break before you actually say the most important thing. So it kind of separates your most important message from the rest of the stuff that you were saying.
So we haven't talked about your work in Asia. You've got a company there that does essentially what you do in Europe, but it's specifically geared towards the Asian market. And when you first mentioned this to me, I kind of wondered about that trajectory. How does a Finnish company get business or start to become such a major player in the Asian market?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't call my company a Finnish company, because I'm the only Finn there. The rest are locals for obvious language reasons and cultural reasons as well. And our clients are mainly not Asian clients. They're American clients that operate in Asia. And we already have that client base from Europe and from my previous line of work.
Okay.
It's definitely a bit easier, even though the situations where we get called in typically have at least one party being a local, either employee or mid-level manager or another company that might be local.
Yeah. I remember back in probably the 90s, maybe even the 80s, when if you told somebody you had a therapist, they'd think, oh, there's something wrong with you. That he's a bit crazy, she's a bit crazy. When companies hire you to come in to handle kind of conflict resolution, threat management, what now? How has that changed over the years? How do companies view hiring a company like yourselves?
Well, the biggest change has been, I have to say, unfortunately, because my line of work is very much related to prevention of violence. And if you look at most of our clients, where they get the push to look at their policies and use our kind of services, American companies, unfortunately, school shootings, workplace violence in the most extreme form.
Mm.
So the companies are thinking death prevention, and I'm thinking harm prevention, because 99.9% of the kind of work that I'm involved, they're not extreme end of violence. Like you said, it's communication skills. There's an Australian psychologist, Carol Egan, who uses the term unintentional bully, and those are pretty much majority of the cases where I'm involved in is the unintentional bully. So you have an individual who doesn't realize what type of impact their own behavior has on their colleagues. So and nobody wants to address this issue. So I'm being called in, I sit down with the individual, or somebody from my company sits
Mm.
down and says, have you noticed, by the way, it doesn't work. We need to figure out a better way to communicate.
Mm.
So yeah, but the push for the change for workplace violence has been mainly driven by the incidents in the US. Another thing, in Europe and Asia, we still don't talk about workplace violence. We talk about counterproduction, because the word violence is so strong. I remember one of your podcast guests were talking about vocabulary and the terms that are being used. How do you define behavior, and how do they define the behavior? Same thing. I mean, if I talk to our clients in Europe or Asia about workplace bullying, workplace violence, they say, no, we don't have that. Okay, so you don't have this, and that. Oh, we have that on a weekly basis. Okay, we'll just have to use a different word.
Interesting, interesting. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end, which is a real damn shame. But I did want to touch on one thing that I found very interesting about you in the research, and this is the year you spent as a chairman of a rugby club. Yeah, I'd like to know a little bit more. I think also I heard you recently saying that, right? You're now no longer on the front line, but now you're in the rugby field. So tell me more about that, the rugby connection.
I love the sport. It is by far my favorite sport on this planet. I mean, I am still involved as a player. I might advertise my favorite club, Potbelly Pigs. So we're all,
Pot-belly pigs.
yeah, so we're all, you have to be over the age of 40, and it's seniors tournaments, and it's more about the beer than the game.
Yeah,
Or I don't know, with rugby, those
they
two
go
things
hand
are
in
separate.
hand. Yeah.
They go hand in hand. Yeah. So yeah, I was shanghaied into the club, as most people my age, at 4 a.m. in a pub. Somebody comes up to me and says, "Oh, you're a big unit. Have you ever tried rugby?" And I said, "No, but it's a great sport, and I'd love to try." So put it there. 2 weeks later, I had gotten my boots from a store, and I went to watch a game in Hong Kong. And I figured I'll meet the guys and we'll do warm up, and then somebody just explains me what's happening on the pitch. And I show up, and they're like, "Oh, great, you're here. Here's your kit, and you're playing." And I said, no, I've never watched the game more than 5 minutes. I don't know what to do. I said, "Don't worry. If you get the ball, just run straight." And that's what I did for 80 minutes. Loved it. Absolutely. And
Fantastic.
I love the values of the game. I love the fact that you don't go and challenge the referee. I love the third half. I mean, it's respect, and it's honor, and following the rules to a certain extent. Yeah, I love it.
Well, Totti, how do our listeners find you? I mean, people who listen to the conversation, they really want to reach out and get in touch with you. How do they find you? And what is it that you're working on at the moment that you're really excited about?
Well, obviously, I'm on LinkedIn, Totti Karpela. I think that's also in the podcast, so it's easy to Google. There's only one of me in the world. And then the company is Peace of Mind, and it's not peace as a piece of cake. It's peace as in peace, peaceofmind.hk. Those would be the easiest ways to find me. What am I really excited at the moment? AI. That's just
Mm.
AI in conflict resolution. Either are you communicating with AI, or is AI giving you advice as to how to proceed? Right now, I'm trying to find police negotiations that would use AI. I haven't come across any, which I find really, really amazing. I'm sure there must be. But yeah, I'm looking at AI as, is it a threat? Is it an opportunity?
I'd probably love to have you back again to talk about that. I think that would be really interesting. I've got a few other guests who are interested in that, so maybe we could have a joint conversation. Would you be prepared to come back again?
Yeah, I'd love that. Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, so Totti Karpela, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. We've gone over time, but I'm sure our listeners will forgive us. It's been a really great conversation, and I look forward to inviting you back on Empathy at the Table.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for the great podcast. I mean, I just found it as we started to talk, and so that's my summer plan, is to listen through all the interviews that you've had. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
I really
Thank you.
enjoyed this.
Take care, my friend. Bye-bye.
You too.
Oh, can you hear me? It's gone. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
Okay.
No, I can't hear you.
1 2 1 2.
But it's okay. I think it's uploaded now, so I'm going to stop it from now. Okay. All right.
It says, wait.